do not believe the United States should in any way interfere with.
Well,
Right.
you're right, and I think that unfortunately Mr. Duffee's rebuttal was a straw man's distortion of my initial argument. If you pay attention to what I said I do believe that we should be friends with nations, trade with them, but do not tangle alliances, in abidance with the traditional and conventional policy of the Constitution. I agree with him that, yes, it is foolish to become involved in extranational alliances, but where he said that we should not be friends with nations, I think the record clearly states that I was quite lucid in my position as to where I stand in that.
Unfortunately, we have to move on to the next question. Queenie?
This actually kind of goes off of what we were just discussing, and this question is directed specifically to Mr. Duffee. In a September 9th article of this year, you were quoted as saying, which I think you might have mentioned a moment ago, I'm not sure which candidate, but you were quoted as saying that our worst international problems are blowback from our illegal activities. What would be your response to those who, as we were discussing earlier, might call you unpatriotic for such a sentiment?
Well, they are confusing two things, patriotism and imperialism. There has been a steady campaign to convince the American public ever since World War II that the two are the same. But imperialism is the belief that one country has rights over another country. Patriotism is the belief that one should respect the rights of the people within one's own country and work with them to produce a decent country. So I believe, yes, we have lots of obligations to people in the United States. I think we have obligations to people in other countries too, because we do live in one world ecologically and in many ways economically. So it's not that we only have obligations to the United States, but it is a complete misconstrual of the concept of patriotism to claim that we have rights over other countries and cannot allow them to act patriotically in their own terms in defense of their own interests. The basic problem is that the U.S. is running an empire. We have 725 military bases in 132 countries. And we basically run the world through the IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organization, and GATT as institutions that are supposedly under the UN, but which no vote of the UN can affect. Those institutions have hundreds of times more power and money than the UN has itself, which has only as much money as at its own disposal as the city budget of Detroit. So we should confine ourselves to what we actually have rights over rather than trying to take the rights of other people and countries. It's unpatriotic.
I do. Yeah. I empathize with Mr. Duffee here to when he said that patriotism should not be obfuscated with imperialism. So with that having been said, taking into consideration his definition, or the implied definition of what distinguishes patriotism from imperialism, his argument has a reductio ad absurdum in it, or a contradiction in premises. What he basically stated, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that imperialism implies that we ourselves, in an American context, have a right to go ahead and to impose our way of life and our values on other nations. But then he completely and totally reverses his position in terms of its principle by saying we should surrender to international authority by having all other nations impose themselves imperialistically on us.
Time. We're going to move on to the next question, unfortunately. Would you like to rebut with that for 30 seconds? 30 seconds.
Nothing remotely like that. Look, we have the actual power in the UN. We have not been paying our dues at the UN, but the UN, we have 1/4 of the workforce in the UN, and half of them report to the CIA. We run all the IMF and the World Bank because we have veto power there by always keeping more than 15% of the amount of money invested. So we always get our way in those institutions because the other countries of the G8, the richest countries on earth, always keep a majority of the money invested, and votes are by amount of money invested. And so it's simply false to say that it's an international institution imposing its will on us when we are imposing our will on the international institution.
Wow, we can keep going on that one. But we have to move on to the next question, unfortunately. Okay, here's my question. This is directed to both of you. You believe that you're going, if elected to the United States Congress, that you're going to bring change in some way. And economically, times here in the U.S., it seems as if we're going into another depression almost. What kinds of ways or ideas that you have that hasn't been presented already by the current Congress that you believe will, affect some kind of change and help these people that are struggling now in this kind of economy?
Well, basically, for 25 years, the U.S. government has been bailing out banks every other year. We do it in odd-numbered years in the hopes that voters will forget about it by elections. And the banks have become so addicted to this that now they finally have to be bailed out right before an election. But basically, we never should have bailed out banks in the first place. Banks exist for profit. People who invest in banks are investing for profit. I don't mind guaranteeing savings in banks and so on, but the people who are speculating in banks should not have their interests guaranteed by the U.S. government and should not be bailed out because they've made bad investments. The basic problem is that the U.S. has guaranteed profit to investors without guaranteeing the right of workers to the value of their labor. And so more and more money keeps on coming out of our activity and profit. As you work for somebody for $10 an hour, you can be pretty sure that you've produced at least $20 worth of goods or services in that hour. And half of it, at least, is going to the owner, to the investor, and that's the part that's being guaranteed by the government. And because all that money is floating around looking for richer investments all around the world, the whole economic system becomes top-heavy in speculation. As there's more and more money that is owned by fewer and fewer people who are all looking for even greater enrichment, and the only way that they can do it is by making riskier and riskier investments and by investing money in poor countries where they can buy resources and labor at the lowest possible prices. What the government should be doing is guaranteeing the rights of people who have money invested here and of laborers here, of people, right, rather than the banks.